All right, so we're COMP3025, Lesson 2, Week 2, Part 3. And what we're going to be talking about now is I want to test drive this welcome app. I've kind of have my playground set up here with Xcode. I'm just going to close this down for a second, and then we're going to go back into Swift. So here I am with Xcode, and I have got the tip calculator app. I think that's the one that we pulled up from before. So let's take a look at Xcode. There's lots of buttons and lots of stuff that when you first look at Xcode, you're like, what is all this stuff? One of the first things to notice if we're going to do a kind of a tour of Xcode is the buttons in the top right corner. So if I click or unclick them, I can change how my workspace is going to look to give myself more space to look. So it's almost like when you have a perspective in Eclipse. You can change your perspective just like we have in other IDEs, where you can hide certain panels and show certain panels. So that's the one thing that we can look at as well. When you look at the project itself, here's a tip calculator project. When I pull this up, again, it's using iOS SDK 8.1. And right now I've targeted the iPhone 6. You could target different simulators by choosing this option right here. So you can say resizable iPad. I can choose the iPhone 4S. It'll run it, iOS 8. That's the last version of iPhone 4 that'll run iOS 8. On iPhone 5 and 6 Plus and so on, right? So right now I'm targeting iPhone 6 with my emulator or my simulator. And let's take a look at some of the parts to this. So again, I have an app delegate. And we'll talk about what that is. Okay, and if you notice, this is written by the people who made the book, right? So they're importing UIKit, and UIKit is probably the SDK that you're going to need to run pretty much all the stuff we have to use for most of this course. There's going to be other piece parts we're going to use as well, but UIKit is something we're going to pretty much always import. Okay, so one of the imports. So when you first look at this class app delegate, you're like, what the hell is that? How come I'm using an app delegate? What is that, right? Here's what I'm doing here is I'm referencing a window object, and I'm using the UI window. The question mark means it's an optional variable, right? So it's an optional component, right? Again, when you first look at it, you're like, well, I'm just looking at code with you right now. And some of this is stub data, like these big sections of comments. This is something that kind of comes into play as soon as you create an app. It's kind of stubs that kind of appear, comment stubs that are automatic. It's not something that that the creator of this app has done. It's not like they put the comments in. These comments come with them when you create these stubs. Here's a function. So when we look at code, func is a function. Right? And if you notice, the application is the variable that's being passed to the function, and then the data type is behind it. So UI application. And if I click on anything, if I click on any part of the app, this part of the window is a context-sensitive window that gives me details on piece parts that I click on. So if I go to this function, and it'll give me more details about the function as I go. All right, so again, it doesn't look like there's a lot in here. It looks like there's a lot of functions that have just been stubbed out. So this is almost like methods that we have to include because it's part of our interface. So you have an interface that's probably been developed for this particular app delegate, and you have to have all these empty methods here, right? So they have to be part of it. You can't override them, but they have to be part of this app delegate. And if you don't have them in, then they'll crash. Something won't run. And that's how it works with Apple. Apple makes you put all the required methods in your classes, whether you use them or not, even if they're empty. So you're going to see that's one of the biggest changes that I found. Whereas if you look at if you're developing for Android, you don't necessarily have to include them. There's certain overrides you got to put in. You have to include certain methods, but not all of them. So this is like every one of them that has to be in there, they're here. And the ones that are separated, they're separated with a bunch of comments. So you know that these are all empty methods. Take a look at them. Every single one of them is empty. There's only I mean, it's just like a stub. The whole thing is a stub. So here's your view controller, and if you notice on the left-hand side, we have our project, right? And the view controller itself, remember we talked about MVC, it's a view and controller. It's kind of a Apple version of model view controller, right? So we're not talking model because model, when we talk about model, we talk about core data, and connecting to some kind of database or some kind of local storage, right? Here we're talking about view and controller, right? And it's one view controller that we're using, right? When we declare variables in Swift, there's a couple of ways we can declare variables. One way is with the var keyword. When you look at the var keyword, you're like, holy crap, that's JavaScript, right? It's not JavaScript. It's actually been around for a long time. You can use the var keyword in Java if you really want to. And you can do the same thing with C#, right? So it's not like it's not around. You could totally do it. The thing that made me laugh when I first saw it was the let keyword. Let is the way we declare our constants, and that goes way back, takes me back to like Pascal or something else like that, right? Like way back in the day. I don't know, I can't remember which language I remember learning it, but I remember using let for constants way back in the day. So you have your var keyword for variables and your let keyword for constants. Okay, kind of very simple stuff. So here we're kind of declaring a couple of decimal numbers. I'm just going to make this a little larger for you guys. And I'm going to kill some of this side here because we don't need it so you guys can see it mostly. I mean, I like the code coloring, I'll be honest with you. I like the way they've colored their code so we can take a look at it, right? The way it's been colored. Here's a link. See where you have we have this IB action. IB action is, you have to have an IB action that links. This is, if you see how there's a little circle in the border, that means that this calculate tip IB action is a type of function that actually does something. So whenever you press the button, this IB action is connected to the button, almost like the wire that connects to the button that does something. It's kind of the event listener, but really what it does is like when I connect, and we'll see how the connection works with the button with the storyboard. This is the thing. Once you see IB action, and this little circle, you know there's a connection between this and the interface. Okay, so we're going to see that as we go forward. Right? And this is actually the same exact thing they had with Objective-C. The whole terminology, IB action, is just a kind of spill off from the old Objective-C classes. And it's the same thing now. That hasn't changed. We're using Swift, but we're using the same, some of the same calls. So this is one. Let's take a look at this line. Let slider value is equal to NS, NS decimal number. This is the exact way we used to do it with Objective-C, right? We're declaring an integer, so we're casting this integer value, right? That used to be this this custom tip percentage slider. This is the actual control, right? The value that comes from the custom tip percentage slider, and we're casting it as an integer, right? Here's the integer right here. Isn't this interesting? And of course, we're sending it into this thing that says make it into a decimal number. So again, when you look at it, is it intuitive? The answer is probably no. And that's what I'm telling you. When you look at it, you say, oh yeah, Swift is a very easy language to learn, and it's very much JavaScript-like, and or when you look at it, it talks to you. But then when you put it into the iOS development side of the house, you're looking at it and going, okay, now here I don't understand what's going on, right? So there's two piece parts to this, right? The Swift language, which we're going to learn, which is not difficult to learn, and then the iOS development piece. And that's where our learning curve is going to be. Our learning curve is going to be all through the iOS development phase, not the Swift language. Swift language, you're going to be like, oh yeah, I get this, right? And it'll happen today. You'll get it. Once I start doing it, you're like, oh God, I get this. I've seen this a million times. I've seen it in JavaScript. I've seen it in C#. I've seen it in a million languages. It's exactly the same stuff. Okay. So I just wanted to give you a little bit of a preview. And you can look at this. Like I said, it's up on Blackboard. You can download it. You can install it, make it work. Here's the main storyboard. Now, in this particular case, it's our view controller, as you see, right? I can slide it around. And if you notice that it's blank. right now this particular app isn't using the storyboard. It's using something called a nib, and it used to be called a nib way back in the day, right? But it's actually labeled a xib, XIB, right? And this is the screen, our launch screen for the tip calculator. Take a look. So this is what it's going to look like when we launch. Now, if you notice, when you first look at Xcode and you see that there's this big screen here, does it look like it'll fit my iPhone 6? The form factor looks weird, doesn't it? But this is what they make it look like now. They make it so that the layout is an adaptive layout. So when you put it on an iPhone 6 or an iPad or whatever, it adapts the layout to what you see there to the viewport that you're using.
The sides there look like they're draggable. Is that to adjust just so we can see?
This part here, you mean? Yeah, you can make it as big or small as you want. You can see what it's going to look like. You can test it out in different form factors. That's what it's for.
Awesome.
But at the end of the day, it's not going to do anything.
Yeah, that's fine. I just was more of if it'll. I was curious how it actually adjusts it. So.
Here's something called First Responder, and if I click on First Responder, and again, there's a lot of hidden functionality in the back end. I'll be honest with you. When you look at this for the first time, you're like, "What is all this stuff?" Really, it's intimidating. But First Responder is where you're going to get your keyboard from the first time. Or if I click if I press, sorry, I can't say click anymore. If I press the screen of my phone, right, what is going to be my first responder? Is it going to be the input field or going to be the background? So that my keyboard is going to flip up or flip down, right? It's called the first responder. And in this particular case, it's not set. We're going to see that later on how you can set that up. So if you press on the screen outside, it'll turn up or turn down. The plist, right, is really the property list for your app, and this is almost like a manifest from Android. If you know Android programming, the plist is like the manifest. It tells you the version of your of the phone, the dictionary version, and so on. There's different other properties here that it's giving you as well. The tests, when I look at the calculator tests, this allows you to create test cases for the tip calculator. It's kind of cool. But to me, I think this is an advanced thing for us at this stage. I don't think it's something that I want to focus on too much. Here's my image assets, and I can click on any one of these things. So if you notice, this is what it's going to look like for the app icon, right? So these are some image assets that we have in this thing. So when you look at the project itself, it's not a very complicated looking project when you're first looking at it. If I move to the desktop, because this is where I've got it stored, and again, I'm going to see if I can, or if I have it. I'm not sure if I have it on the desktop or if I think it's in my course files. Hold on a second. I want you to see what the layout is. There's two ways to look at this thing. One thing is to look at the tip calculator in Xcode, and the other way is to actually physically look at the files here in the folder. And if you notice, the stuff that's here in the folders and the stuff that's inside Xcode isn't exactly identical, which means that there's property and manifest files in the back end that create the way Xcode looks from a project perspective, just like Visual Studio and other IDEs out there. So the stuff you're going to see in Xcode, there's not a total analog for it on, in your folders. Okay. Something else I should mention as well. If you've never used a Mac, or if you're not a Mac user, there's going to be a bit of a learning curve for you in general, right? Because you've never used a Mac, and now you're trying to develop iOS devices, and some of the learning curve is, holy crap, where is everything, right? Oh, I forget. Or, hey, isn't the window, I closed my window on the right side of my screen with the X. Well, there is no X, right? So small things like that are going to slow you down as well. But again, over the next 14 weeks, it won't be an issue. Actually, if after week 1 or 2, it's not going to be something that's apparent if you use it regularly. So that's what the tip calculator looks like when it's in the Xcode project. Let's run it. So first, I'm going to run it on the iPhone, and then I'm going to switch it to the iPad. Let's take a look at the calculator. So the simulator comes up fairly quick for what it is. All right, and it's quite big because it's going to try and be as realistic as possible. So here, as an example, I've got a slider, And what does this thing do? When I click on the device, and let me make this a little bit smaller.
Is it matching pixel for pixel? Is that why it's so big?
Yes. And there's ways, because I'm on this screen, it's like this big. But when I take it off the screen, the iPhone, the simulator fits on my screen actually, nicely, right? So again, what you want to do is, if you notice, I've got this, this keypad that comes up and it's always up. This is why there's no first responder. If there was a first responder, this is like a calculator, exactly what it is. Then the keyboard would disappear. I would press the keyboard and it would go away, right? Just like it does for other kinds of things, like our when we're sending email. Like when I go into my email and I'm starting to type an email, right? Let me see if I can do this for you. So here's my, I don't know if you guys can see this, but I've got my phone and I start typing. And if I can put my keyboard away, right? And every time I put my keyboard away, the first responder becomes my screen. Anywhere on my screen when I tap, the keyboard will raise up again. That's the first responder. There is no first responder here because the keyboard is locked. It's just a number pad, right? And that's why we didn't have that first responder clicked when we saw that, right? So here I can put in an amount. Like I went for the whole idea with this tip calculator is I go for dinner and I want to calculate my tip and I can't figure out what 15% is in my head. I don't know how that's possible, but let's just say, right? And let's say the tip or the amount that I'm talking about is a weird amount, like maybe it's $123.69, right? Or no, maybe it's $123.69, right? So then how do I calculate 15%, right, accurately? And that's what this tip calculator does. It's an instant calculation for you instead of having a calculator ready to go. That's what this whole idea is. Now the great thing about this from a learning perspective is you've got a couple of things here to figure out. One is I've got some labels that we're going to put on. So from a UI perspective, it's very simple. I've got a slider control. I've got a label. I've got an input box, right? And I've got some labels down here in a chart kind of format. And then I've got keyboard input down here. So really, as a first app, or one of the first apps we're going to learn, it's very basic. So you got to consider your first assignment is probably not going to be much more challenging than this, right? Why? Because you need to know how to lay things out, use Swift, wire things up with your app, and the Swift code, very, very simple to make this go.
You learn to crawl before you can fly.
It's a crawl, believe me. Yes?
Is the iOS simulator tied with Xcode?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. It's built into Xcode, so once you run it, like I said before, the iOS simulator used to be part of something called Interface Builder. Xcode, the IDE, and the editor used to be separate. So you had a separate editor, a separate interface builder, and then an iOS simulator. And now they've, over the last several years, since I think Xcode 5, they brought it all together. Or maybe it was Xcode 4. It's been a while. And I was there. I saw the original interface builder way back in the day when I was on Lion. It was bad. It was like, and think about the workflow that was what we were using back then, right? So you got to figure as things have gone forward, this has become easier and easier. Okay, so how do I stop this simulator? Well, I got to press the stop button. And once I do that, I'm not running it anymore. The simulator is still going, but you notice it's taking me out here, and I've got a couple of apps, right? My first demo, right? I was demoing it just the other day. I got a couple of apps that I can run, or I can stop the simulator. I can quit the iOS simulator this way. I cannot, because the button isn't here. There is no virtual button here. I do have control of the hardware though. Like for example, I can click home, right? And when I do that, I can simulate home by pressing Shift Command H, right? So Shift Command H will take me home. Here's the tip calculator. It gives you that. And if I hold, just like I would normally hold, if I hold down the controls, I could certainly remove the apps just like I normally would. And if you notice, it's not so bad. Hey, here's my Starbase 12 program I tried to upload. It was impossible. Wouldn't work. So anyway, so that's how the the tip calculator would work. So again, Shift Command H takes you back to home, and you can use the iOS simulator that way, right? It's the same thing that we would normally expect if you're using an iPhone. Okay, so this is cool. From a hardware perspective, this is how you control the device. You can also instantly change the device. So if I want to go from an iPhone 6 to an iPhone 4S, it'll reboot the simulator and put it into iOS with the same operating system, iOS 8, but now you're on an iPhone 4S as opposed to an iPhone 6. Now this seems to fit a little better for me on my viewport, on my view screen, than the iOS 6 phone, right? And if I run it again on this thing, you can run it on different, oh sorry, I'm running it on the 6 again. Hold on a second. Let's try that again. If I run it on the iPhone 4S, the advantage to the iOS simulator is, here it is on the iPhone 4S. It actually, you can see how it's a little bit tighter, right? And how it would look on the iPhone 4S. See, I'm not happy with this, the layout. If you notice the layout here, the numbers are brushed right up against the labels here for total. It's very, very tight, right? So I'm not sure that I enjoy the layout too much. Now the buttons might be the right size for your fingers. Maybe that's why they're designed that way, because they're using standard calculator buttons. This is a standard library that they're using, right? That's why to me I probably would use some kind of first responder where you can tap it and then the keyboard would go away. Tap it again, it comes back, right? To optimize your space. Okay, so that's just this thing. What about from a hardware perspective? I can also do things like a rotate left, right? And if you notice, there is no response. That's another thing this app doesn't do. It doesn't respond to different orientations. It's not meant to do that. It doesn't have a listener, so to speak, to respond to the orientation change, right? So that's something it doesn't do. But that's what you can do with the hardware control with the iOS simulator. But again, from a speed perspective, you see it's not so bad. Like it's not like it's like crawling too badly. I could do a shake gesture if I want. It's not going to do anything in this particular context because there is no shake gesture for the iOS for this tip calculator. It doesn't make any sense, right?
So you can simulate a failure as well?
I could, yeah, I could do that. I could say I could simulate an incall. Here's an incall status bar, right? So I'm calling. What's the incall status bar look like? It's going to push things down, right? Because when you're getting a call and you want to switch to the calculator, it moves your layout, and you want to keep that in mind because we want to look at what it looks like online before we create the layout. Because imagine that's a glitch, right? You make a calculator app, and then so you take the call and you say, "Hold on a second, I just got to figure out the tip here," and you're going like, "Okay, I can't see that, right?" So that's an issue, right? So that's one thing it'll do. And that's why it's good to have the simulator. And if you notice, it's not bad. What I recommend to you before you go for today is, even though Xcode in front of you isn't running Xcode 6, go on to it. Take a look at what Xcode 5 has in front of you. You have a Mac in front of you. Log into your Mac, check out your Mac with Xcode 5, and take a look what it looks like to put together a simple, to run the simulator. You can run the simulator and create a simple app, right? Now there's some choices if you're going to do that. Let's do that together. So if I was going to create a simple app, and I'm going to use, obviously it doesn't have Swift, it has Objective-C. Well, let's take a look at that for a second. So I'm going to quit Xcode, and I'm going to do this with you. And here I've got the emulator still up, or the simulator. I'm going to quit that too. And let's just minimize everything so I can start this with you. So again, I would go to my developer tools, I would hit Xcode, and then it gives you an option. Now mine gives me an option to do a playground, yours won't, but I can create a new project. And you should have a similar option on your side, right? What I would recommend is you sit there and you choose single view application, because that's the first one we're going to do. So choose single view application for those people. You can still do this with me, even though you're using Xcode 5 and you're not using Xcode 6. You can still follow along. All right. So if we do a single view application, again, if you notice, look, you can build both iOS apps with Xcode as well as OS 10 apps with Xcode, right? For now, we're going to stick with this single view application. Press next. Now, what you're going to do then and you should have a very similar situation here on iOS 5, or Xcode 5, I mean. You have to develop a product name. So if I say my product name is called COMP3025 demo, that's what my product name is called, right? My organization name, that's me, let's say. I can also choose a organization identifier. Let's just use, I'm using my little company that I got, Acrotech, which doesn't do anything. It's just a placeholder for my tests right now, Acrotech. And if you notice, I need to put a bundle identifier together, and it does it automatically for you. It's using reverse domain naming, right? So it's like com.acrotech and then the name of your file, which would be COMP3025 demo. I have a choice of using Swift, but I can also in Xcode 6, I can use Objective-C as well. So let's stick with Objective-C since you've got Objective-C in front of you, right? And you can choose iPhone, iPad, or Universal, right? If I make a Universal app, it means it'll run with everything. Let's stick with just iPhone, just for now. And let's not use core data. That adds a little bit extra package information that you don't need right now for us. So I don't recommend. You might have a different screen in front of you than I do. What was that? You may not have the core data here, but you might have it somewhere else.
We need to give the class prefix. I don't know what it. I think we do. It won't let you go forward.
A class prefix?
You need company. You need the names and identifiers all filled in.
It's a namespace, yeah.
Company identifier?
Yeah, so your company identifier would be like a reverse namespacing. So com dot, make a name up, example dot, and whatever the name of your app is.
Android Studio explained it really well with that. They're like, okay, whatever your URL is,
Yeah.
you just like put that
Just
there,
reverse.
put that there,
And you're good to go.
Called
Yeah.
like reverse Hungarian or something like that.
Reverse namespacing or whatever it's called. Yeah. Now if you notice, look, down here it says source control, create Git repository on my Mac. So back to the people who've been using Git with me, GitHub, for a couple years now, Git is the primary way to do it, right? Does it give you other source control options here? The answer is no, right? Some people are like, I don't like Git. I like SVN, I like this, I like whatever. Git's the way to go.
Git is definitely the way to go.
Yeah, I think so. Now it asks me where I want to put it. I'm going to put my demo on my desktop for now because why not? And you go ahead and do the same thing because don't worry, it'll wipe out if it allows you to. Let's say create. Okay, and when we create our file, if you notice, right now I'm clicked on the top of my application, right? My COMP3025 demo application. I'm targeting iOS SDK 8, but I can choose another deployment target. And for you guys, I think it's 7.1 would be the max. What is it?
Yep. 7.1, yeah.
So I'll target the same deployment target as you. I could do that. That's the great thing about Xcode. It allows you to target earlier versions of the SDK, right? Okay, here's the device orientation options for me. I don't know if you guys have the same thing. I have portrait upside down. I can click landscape left, landscape right, and you can see that some of these things, when you click them, it makes you, on my side at least, it makes it so that it adds those stubs in from a control perspective into the code. Like remember we talked about all these extra methods? These extra stubs will be added in because you're going to adjust for things like portrait or landscape left, landscape right, and so on. Now it says, look, it says no signing identity found. Xcode can request a new iOS development signing identity for you. Fix the issue. I can't ask for that unless I'm a developer. So let's not do that. Let's leave it the way it is. Okay? I'm not sure if you guys have the same thing. If I click on the top here, it tells me other things. Like mine has the ability for me to choose capabilities. In Xcode 6, it allows me to say, hey, do I want to connect with iCloud? Do I want to connect with Game Center? Do I want to connect? And there's a bunch of options here of apps that I want to connect with. Yeah. Sorry? Exactly. It allows me to say which ones, what capabilities do I have? Do I want to connect with my personal VPN? What do I want to do? If I keep going down the list here, this is my plist, same info as my plist. My build settings, right? So again, more information about how I link and package and everything else, and so on. Let's not look at too much on that because you're going to lose your brains here, right? Here's some stuff that we had before. If you notice now I'm using, this is what Objective-C looks like. This isn't Swift anymore. And if you notice, hey look, I'm importing UIKit, just like I would if I was importing Swift. If I was using Swift, I would be importing UIKit. I'm doing the same thing, except I'm using that .h accessor method that I use when I use any kind of C library, right? So the same kind of stuff that you would normally see. Here's my app delegate, and if you notice, there's a bunch of stubs. I didn't do anything. I didn't put all this comment in here. This is what was created as I created my app. So there's obviously this view controller is where I'm going to put a lot of my code. This is where it's all going to go in, right in here, right? If I want to make something that works. My main storyboard is where I can drag and drop different things. And on the bottom right-hand corner of your screen is where all of your buttons and everything else come from. So if I scroll down, you can actually search on the bottom. If I put in button, so if I search for button, right, and I want all my button types to be on there, I can search in the bottom right-hand corner, and I can pull up a button. Here's my button, right? I can throw my button in here. I can drag and drop my button on the screen. So here's my first button, right? And if you notice, again, I have my context-sensitive menu on the right-hand side, right? So my menu itself on the side starts creating looking at the properties and everything else that I need, so I can modify my button, like my shadow color and my system, my font, what it's going to look like. I can choose different fonts. Right? I don't have to choose system. I can choose other kinds of fonts. I can choose a custom font for my buttons and so on, right? My name of my button, which is obviously going to be button. Maybe I'll make this call. I'll call it click me, like we normally do, right? When we do a test. Here's the name of my button. Button. And also, see what happens? And also, if you see my button's faded away because I've made it too small. Here's click me, right? I can change the size of my button. I can position my button. If you notice, there's some smart guides that tell me I'm in the middle of my screen, right? Or in the middle of my screen this way. So I can position my button or a series of buttons in a row, right? And again, this is using a very standard adaptive layout, okay? Well, this is fine and good, but how do I do anything with this bloody button? Well, if I right-click on it, I have extra information, right? For example, these are all the sent events, and what I want to do is I want to create an action, right? So if I double-click on action, I can link my action, as an example, to my view controller, right? So once I link it to my view controller, if that's the right thing to do, right, it'll automatically create that action, right? And that's how you would normally do it. What you do is you take your action, you right-click on your button, you drag it across, and literally you wire it up like that, right? And it creates the stub that you need for your button. Let me just bring this closer, right? So again, these little buttons right here, right? Again, if you notice, all these areas here on the left-hand side are the recipients for my actions. It doesn't matter whether I'm using Xcode or something else. Same thing. If I drag and drop one of these things, it'll literally put them. This thing will stay up, by the way, if I do this. So if I click App Delegate, or if I click View Controller, and I go back to Main Storyboard, right, and I right-click on my button, right, then I have a gesture recognizer, right? I can choose the gesture recognizer. I'm actually clicked on the back screen here, the blank screen. Or I can click on my button and I can create an action. And this is what I want to do. I want to create this action, and you drag and drop from there into your files. So again, I don't want to go too much more in detail because at the end of the day, this is all Objective-C. The stuff you're going to see is like, it's exactly what you would see in Swift, but where we're seeing it in Objective-C here. But you should be able to see this stuff. So if I want to run this app the way it is with just this click me button and no functionality, I can choose, you should be able to choose a device that you want to test it on. So let's say I want just a button, and maybe I want a label. So I'm going to put in a label as well. So I'm going to see if I can find a label. Right, here's my label. and I'm going to put my kind of pull my label across here, right? Here's my label, and maybe I'll put in like welcome to iOS development, right? Here it is. Here's my label. Here's my click me button. And when I run this thing, let's say I'll target an earlier version of the iPhone 4S with 7.1, right? And I press play. Please select a different device and try again, because 4S is not available at that time. That's right. Let's try I don't know, iPhone 5. I wonder why it said it's not available. I love it. It's not available. That's the first time I've ever seen that, actually.
Is it still running? The other one's still running?
No. I stopped it.
Is it because you're trying to run 7.1 instead of 8.1?
It could be, but it shouldn't stop me from running whatever operating system I want or on any device. Oh, there we go. There we go. So if you notice, there's an issue, right? They're pushed out way over here because, and this again, I'm using an iPhone 5 because of my layout, my positioning, right? I'm way out here, right? And my screen isn't anywhere near that size, and I haven't adjusted or done any kind of adjust. There's certain things you can do to adjust the screen size and the layout, and I haven't done any of that. But the idea is you can quickly put together an app by dragging and dropping stuff. There's going to be controls on the right-hand side, just like we would do when we're doing rapid application development with C#. And when we wire up the controls, you'd expect, this is what you would expect from Apple. You double-click on the control, and it writes the code for you, right? Not a chance. Not a chance. It doesn't do that at all. And this is where the learning curve comes in. With Visual Studio and controls, when you do rapid application development, you double-click, if you remember, and all of a sudden it's written for you. Here, no. And here you have to physically, literally wire it up, right, for each control. And write the code. So it's going to be a bit of a curve. Like I said, it's going to be a bit of a, how do I make this work? And how come this is not working? And I'm expecting it to work this way, but it's actually working something else. And it's not quite showing me what I'm expecting it to show. And you know what? Hey, how come the simulator isn't coming up with iPhone 4S like it didn't come up now? And then you have to dig into it and find out why. And by the way, this isn't anything different than any other person who's developing on the iPhone. Okay, so let's, here's my launch screen, right? And my launch screen seems like the same kind of launch screen that I had before. I can kind of adjust it to see what it would look like on a smaller device, right? And if you notice, this is automatic. It says, you know, copyright 2015. I didn't do any of this. This is something that it was created automatically when it created my app. Just like the Deedle app was created. If you notice, they had a launch screen as well. Same thing. Now you can put artwork here. You can do all that kind of stuff that we normally would put in the launch screen, and it launches up something that comes up while all the resources for the app are loading, right? Okay.
Does all that happen automatically?
Yeah.
If you have a bunch of images, it'll automatically load them up for you?
If you put them on here and you attach them to the app, to the launch screen, you will. So there's two pieces. There's the launch screen and there's the main storyboard. And the main storyboard normally is where we do all of our work, where we do our dragging and dropping. Okay? And again, you can choose the first responder. You can choose how to exit your app, and you can choose the view controller and how to connect. There's different ways of wiring up your controls. Like again, if I click here and I look on the right here and it says, what's the default state? Highlighted, selected, disabled. Like there's a lot of control for each of your controls, a lot of properties for your controls, right? That you can choose. You can also choose the way it's aligned in terms of spacing and everything else. There's tons and tons of formatting you can put into play here.
Tom,
Yes.
when you go to put 6 on here,
Yeah.
they also need to have developer mode turned on. You can't run the apps right now
At all?
at all. It's asking for administrator password.
Okay, I'll let them know. Thank you. Oh, so you won't even be able to run. You can't run this at
You
all.
can't run that.
Wow. Okay, thank you for that. I'll let Ross know. Actually, you know what? Yeah, I'll let him know. So that's some of the issues. That's some of the problems we have. We want to try and make this go, but you know, this is something that we should have set up ahead of time for you guys. And I apologize because when I was talking, so here's my UI button. That's my class that I'm using, right? And again, this is the same class. This UI button class is the same class that I would use when I'm calling it from Swift. Okay, so let's pause this right now. We have a little bit more time before I want to let you guys. I think I'm going to let you guys go early today, just because I want to collect more information for next time, right? I want to have enough content for you guys. And by the way, I think 8 o'clock was your original stop time, if I'm not wrong, right? So I don't want to kill you guys too much in the first night with a lot of this stuff. And again, we don't have our systems working 100% either. So let's go and do a little bit of Swift. That's my recommendation, and then we'll call it a night. Okay? Okay, so let's quit Xcode. Hey, you're right. Whoever says I can't run the iPhone 5, it's because I had it running in the background. Let's go to that workspace online. So I'm recommending that we run swiftlang.com, and that's where we run Swift. And then, of course, you have your output over here. Okay. I'm going to pull up my other presentation. I have this in, I'm not sure if I have it up online yet, but I will. I've kind of pulled together the basics of some Swift essentials. I won't be able to get into enumerations or anything like that today, but I think what I'd like to try and do is at least talk about some basics with strings and characters and collection types and so on, if we can get that far. So again, the same kind of things we see all the time with Swift are the same things that you've seen before, like I said before, with other languages that you know and love. Here's an example. Let maximum number of login attempts equal to 10, right? And there's two. There's a variable let and a constant let and a variable var, right? And if you notice, we haven't decided the data type. Now, for a very advanced language, when you say, hey, I don't have a data type, what does this mean? You're going to think, and you would be incorrect to think like this, does this mean that I could change my current login attempt variable to a string? And the answer would be no. Once you've decided on what type of variable it is and you load it up with a value, that's it for its life. So yes, it's flexible in that Swift does type inference, right? And most of the time, you don't have to specify what type of variable it is. An example of that would be, here I am. I'm going to declare a couple of variables. I'm going to say var. Let's follow me with this. So you can go online on runswiftlang.com. And I'm going to say var my variable, right? And I can put a colon, and I can say the type of variable, right? And maybe I'm going to say int. And I can say int is equal to 5, right? So here's my variable, and it's telling me that there's an issue, because it is an issue, because there is no int lowercase, it's int uppercase for Swift, right? Int lowercase would be nice in some other languages, like Java, but in Swift, it's capital. Yes?
Is that the whole program though?
What do you mean?
Well, there's no like main or that's the entry point, it's just bam.
You can create all that stuff. We're just talking about, forget that stuff for now. Let's learn variables. Let's learn what variables look like. Let's learn what functions look like. But yes, you're right. There is all the other stuff. There's functions, there's classes, there's everything else you would normally
I
expect.
know, but would that compile?
Yes.
So I don't need an entry point. It's just,
No.
That's just bam.
Yes. If you're just using Swift, this would work, right? Because that's why it's not giving me an error. And if I do a print line, so if I start typing and go print line, right? And if you notice, I want to print line my variable, right? Then my variable, if I've done it correctly, and it looks like I have not, it says expression resolves to an unused L value print line my variable, right? Yeah. My variable is just an integer, right? Now, if you notice, there's a couple things that I'm not doing. There's no semicolons, right? And if I do this, if I take away the data type altogether, my variable is equal to 5, right? This works perfectly fine as well, because 5, my variable, then if I hover over it, you know that this variable is an integer because 5 is an integer. So it does type inference. That's what it's called, right? Type inference is looking at it going, oh yeah, I know what that is. I know it's my variable is equal to 5. If I do my variable, right? My variable is equal to 10.5 now, right? It'll error out saying int does not conform to protocol float. Yes.
Does this support functions similar to C# where you do like 5, where you specify that 5 is decimal? Do you have to do 5.0 to tell that I want I want it to be a floating?
Yes. Because, for example, if I was to do, like, look, as an example here, it gave me an error because it's saying, hey, wait a minute, you declared me as an integer, and now you're telling me I'm a float. I can't do that.
Double, isn't it?
Yeah, or a double, whatever. It says
I think-
float.
I think the implicit is a double.
But I think it infers it. I'm not sure if it infers it as a float or as a double. I have to look at it. Did you?
I could be wrong.
In my playground, if I go back to my playground, and this is the advantage of using playgrounds, playgrounds give you code hinting as well, right? So here I am, here's my hello playground. And if I use this little eyeball, it'll actually kind of zone into it and see what it is, right? I can expand it and it'll tell me what this, what's physically in the object. Now each of these things is an object, right? So I'm importing UIKit. I don't have to. Let me go back to my variable, var, and if I notice it's giving me the code hinting here, my variable, right? And if I put the colon and I start typing int, it's going to ask me, it's going to give me the code hinting, right? My playground will give me the code hinting that I need. And if you notice, these are all the different types of integers I can declare, just like Objective-C or C or some other fancy-dancy language, right? Let's go int. And like I said, if I declare an int of 5, and later on I go my variable, and now here's my variable, look at it. It even tells me my variable is an integer, right? And my variable is now equal to 10.5, right? It'll instantly know that there's a problem, and it'll give me a problem in the kind of in the gutter, right? And it'll tell me that int does not conform to protocol float literal convertible, which means that's the error. Okay, so that's variables, right? There's type inference and there's implicit types, right? Explicit types is what I mean. You can explicitly tell the Swift how to declare your variable, very, very simply. And now there's the let keyword. So let's say, for example, I'm using the let keyword and I say let, lives. I'm conforming to the standards of constants, let's say. Let lives equal to 3, right? And if I set lives plus plus, right, which would work, it gives me an error. Why? Because lives is a constant, right? And if I click on this thing, it says cannot invoke plus plus with an argument of type int. Actually, it's because it's a constant and you can't change anything when it's a constant. I can't update my let value because let tells us that lives is a constant and it's an integer constant because of type inference. All right? We haven't told it specifically that it's an integer, but because 3 is an integer, therefore it's inferring that it's an integer. Okay, so these are cool. We've done this before. How about a for loop? Let's try one of those, right? Looks kind of the same. So for, and I open up a bracket. Normally I use brackets. You can use brackets if you want. And you know what? I can use a semicolon too. If I want to use a semicolon, it's not going to complain. Why? Because if I use semicolons, how often have we used semicolons in our programming life? All the time, right? So you're going to use a semicolon. It's going to happen. And you know what? Swift is built so that it's not going to complain. You don't need it, right? You don't need to use semicolons. But if you want to, because it's your coding style, you go ahead. That's what it's basically telling you, right? So lives equal to 3. If I want to do a for loop, and Jean-Luc, why don't we do a for loop together? Let's see if you can infer what a for loop looks like. Yeah, come on. Do a for loop for me in Swift. You know how to do it.
In Swift, okay, so for
Yeah.
I guess you have to declare a variable.
var, yeah. Anything. Come on, go ahead, John Luke. X.
Cats.
Cats is equal to 0. Cats is less than 10. Cats plus plus. Would that be a for loop for you with some kind of code block? Right? Is it erroring out?
Yes.
What is it erroring out for? It's going to tell me what it errors out for. It's going to say expected expression after the operator. Right? So what's my expression? There's nothing in here. That's why it's erroring out. There's nothing. It's an empty. It's a blank for loop. So maybe what I want to say is my variable, right? My variable plus plus. Right? That's a valid expression, right? But it's saying, oh, I'll be okay. Prefix postfix is equal is reserved, it says. Right? Prefix postfix is a problem. Right?
Is it an issue with the
Oh.
space?
Yeah, really.
Oh, wow.
Very picky.
Doesn't care about semicolons, but cares about spaces.
Let's take a look at the, we take a look at this little button here. 10 times it says. What if I pick this button here? It shows us the graph of the values over a time frame, right? So again, with the playground, that's one thing that's really kind of cool, right? But Jean-Luc, you were close, right? Even without knowing the syntax for Swift, you kind of can figure it out, right? What if I take away these brackets? Because I don't need these brackets, right?
The for loop is exact same as JavaScript.
Yeah. How about I take away the brackets? Can you do this with JavaScript without the brackets? Yes. You don't need brackets. You don't need parentheses at all. So when you do a for loop, it's going to look like this.
It feels so messy without it.
It's because it's in your head.
It becomes less readable.
If you want to use a for loop, you can use a for loop, man. If you want to use parentheses, go ahead, right? That's what they tell you to do. Do what you feel comfortable doing is what the answer is. But most new Swift developers, when they teach it, they'll teach it like this. How about
There's gotta be some problems somewhere.
okay, let's see. How about an if statement? Jean-Luc, again, you're my guinea pig. Let's do an if statement together. Let's say if my variable becomes
Cats less than.
cats is only lives and dies within this context, though, right? So let's.
If my variable is greater than lives.
Okay, my variable greater than lives, right? Okay, that's cool. Then what? There's no brackets. No brackets. Bake a cake. Okay. Then let's say we'll start typing a print line if we can. A print, right? And we look at the different options for print line, and then print line the object, right? It tells us what to do. Print line, and we're gonna print line what? My variable. Why not? Okay, and look what it is. It's 15. We can look at the graph and what it looks like, right? But really, I mean, it's nothing that you haven't seen before. If you're looking at Swift and you're seeing this, you're like, I've seen this stuff before. The conditional statements, switches, same idea, right? So if I do a switch, so I'm going to switch, right? And my switch is going to be my variable. Why not? And inside there I have a case, right? Case, it's 5, right? I don't have a break though. So I don't have that as an option. If I put break, okay, it allows me to do that. Case 6. I have to talk about all the different cases. How about a default case? It does that too, right? And with the break, what it doesn't do is it doesn't do fall through like we expect in other languages. So it won't allow you to do fall through or empty statements. You've got to cover every case in a switch.
That's one of the advantages of the case actually fall through.
No fall through in this case. No fall through at all. So that means that if you want to do 5, 6, 7, 8, and they're all the same, you can't do that. What you can do is do one of these, right? If you want to do a range, 5 to 6, 5 to 8, right? You can do that, right?
Fall through can get messy and
It
unexpected.
can be, yeah. That's great.
Yeah, expected a colon after case. Yeah, sorry, I forgot that. Here we go.
In that case, will 6 ever be guessed or?
5 to, well, in this case, no. But if I do, let's say, 9, if I do a case 9 to 13, right, I can do that. I'm just making it up here. And then maybe, let's say, if I can also do this with my cases, case, 14 and less than 15, which means I'm not doing a range. Sorry, I forgot to add the break. I'm not doing a range. I'm saying go from 14 to 15, but not including 15. Where the other ones are saying go from 5 to 8, including 5 and 8. So that's the range. I can do that with a range, right? So there's some extra little functionality here that's included with Swift that you wouldn't see necessarily in other languages. Okay, I'm going to leave it there for tonight. I wanted to give you a little bit of a breather with Swift, with a little bit of the playground. This is what the playground looks like. You can certainly play around with the Swift online. It's not as nice as the playground, for sure. I'm really hoping that they're going to have it all ready to go for us next week, and then we can get right into more Swift essentials, object-oriented programming with Swift, because we want to look at classes, and all the good stuff with Swift that we're going to do, and then right into iOS programming by not next week, but the week after. Okay? And that's it for me.